I went into Harper one day and I said, we need, no, I just said children. And he said, what about children? And I said, well, without children, we don't have a family.
Welcome to American Movie Classics Family Portrait. Looking today at the Marx Brothers.
What kind of daddy? I was so mad about him. How can I give you an... He was enchanting, so adorable, but don't lean on him. It's sort of like having Peter Pan as your father.
Groucho gave me a book. The only thing that he ever gave me in his life was a book. Memoirs of a Mangy Lover by Groucho Marx. Inscribed, it just says, Dear Billy, burn this, Groucho.
I really just grew up as a child of Groucho. He became sort of a legend, and that's when it began to sink in that he was more than just my father. He was sort of a famous comedian.
The extraordinary chemistry of the Marx Brothers on stage can be attributed in part to their sense of loyalty to one another offstage. As individuals, Harpo, Groucho, and Chico had radically different personalities and lifestyles, but as brothers, they were united by an unusually strong bond, which they formed at the very beginning. One Saturday night, back in 1881, Simon Marx went to a dancing school on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. He wasn't a rich man, but he was young and good-looking, and he knew how to dance. That night, the young Don Juan met his match, the flirtatious, pretty, and ambitious Minnie Schoenberg. 3 years later, they were married. Their sons would grow up to become the characters we know as the Marx Brothers.
I wouldn't give him $1 a week.
Not so loud, he'll take it.
Yep.
The Marxes moved the entire family into a 3-bedroom apartment on East 93rd Street in New York City. Crammed into this apartment were all the brothers, Harpo, Chico, Groucho, Zeppo, and Gummo, as well as Minnie, Frenchie, Minnie's parents, Cousin Polly, and Uncle Julius.
They were always within that little home. They were very poor.
Frenchie was a tailor who, as my father often said, was really the basis for the song Sam Who Made the Pants Too Long, because he never could get the pants to fit in the suits and so forth. But he was a great cook.
He was the cook because the mother was very busy playing poker in the afternoons with her relatives. And maybe he would make a whole dinner out of a loaf of bread and a cabbage. You know, he could do it.
He let me have frankfurters, and my mother never let me have a frankfurter. And then he'd say, Maxine, just not tell Betty, okay? He was so, they were all terrified of my mother.
Minnie put her boys to work. She needed to keep them out of trouble. She also needed the money.
The boys were so bad to begin with, so terrible. They didn't know from creativity on stage. They just, they were shoved on stage and do something, so they sang.
Well, my mother had named us Nightingales simply because none of the 4 of us could sing.
Must have been a good
It's very difficult to have an act where you call Nightingales and nobody can sing.
One thing that always makes me angry about the people who talk about the brothers is they always mention my father, the womanizer. Well, what the hell do they think Groucho and Harpo were? They were just as bad as Daddy. No difference. The only difference was that Harpo was a bachelor until he was 50. But Groucho was bad. They were all womanizers. They grew up in vaudeville. They grew up as little boys in the most raunchy, disrespectful attitude about women that you could ever imagine, except your wife, your mother, and if you had a daughter. But otherwise, all women were fair game.
They were out, of course, as you know, for years in weird vaudeville situations that the mother set up as this great agent for the entertainment world.
When Chico joined the troupe, Minnie was the manager, and he saw that she was doing really dreadful things, like she had other clients, and so she'd sell them cheap to get the other ones work. And he just said to his brothers, "I'm taking over."
With the four Nightingales performing on the road, Minnie encouraged the fifth boy, Gummo, to join the Army. Some say Minnie sacrificed him so that her other sons would not be drafted. When Gummo returned from duty, he didn't return to the act.
Gummo was kind of the guiding light for the boys. They thought of him as being a more serious fellow, probably because he wasn't an entertainer.
Zeppo remained in the act, but he was always the least known of the brothers, and the least happy as a performer.
See, Zepp had no place to go. Daddy was the Italian, and Harpo was the pantomimist, and Grouch was Grouch. And there was no place for Zepp to go, because his humor was exactly like Groucho's. The same biting wit.
The core members of the team, Groucho, Harpo, and Chico, stuck with the act through all the years ahead.
They stayed very warm and close the rest of their lives, having, well, it's natural. They just survived this horrendous early life by being together.
The Marx Brothers triumphed in vaudeville, and then on Broadway, their next step would be Hollywood.
I was living in Long Island, and the phone rang, and Daddy was on the phone. And he said, "Monkey Face, guess what?" And I said, "What?" He said, "You're going to come out this summer, and you know what?" I said, "What?" He said, "You're going to have a house with a swimming pool and tennis courts." I said, "Daddy, you're joking." He said, "No, really." I got off the phone. I said to Aunt Flo, "We're going to have a swimming pool, and we're going to have tennis courts." I mean, it sounded to me like, you know, that's what a princess in a fairy tale had.
At age 41, Harpo was still a bachelor. He hadn't yet found the perfect woman to make his wife until one night when he attended a party for Samuel Goldwyn.
Went to a big party for perhaps the most unpopular man in town, and was seated next to Harpo, and turned to me to be polite. Apparently, I said something that made him laugh.
They started dating, and he was a confirmed bachelor.
Harpo was very scared to get married. They went together for quite a few years. He was terrified of marriage.
Susan Fleming was one of the most successful actresses very few people ever heard of. She did 20, 30 pictures for Columbia and Paramount, but Mom never really liked show business, and her best way out of show business was to marry Harpo.
And so Harpo and Susan eloped in 1936.
We were escaping out of town. Harpo didn't want the local gossip columnists, who were very influential and kind of frightening.
They drove around looking for someone who could perform the ceremony. They finally found a fire chief who would marry them.
And I got the giggles because I thought it was just too unreal. What are we doing here? And we got back in the car, and I said, I don't think that was legal. I really don't think, I don't see how it could be. So we stopped the car, and he says, "Mrs. Marx, I am yours now forever, whether you like it or not."
I understand about our adoptions that they were all done for very special reasons. Mom wanted Dad to have a family.
When Harpo and Susan decided to adopt a child, they had no idea of the obstacles that lay ahead. Harpo was Jewish and Susan Christian, and this complicated the adoption process. While in reality, they were deeply in love on paper. They were incompatible. But Harpo and Susan never gave up.
We went in. Yes, you called us. We come to see the little boy. And here's this little boy, and the nurse is there and trying to feed him, and she said, "He won't eat." So I said, "Well, let me try." So she gave me the spoon, and I held it in front of the little face with the big brown eyes, and I put the spoon in his mouth, and he ate, and it was, you know, like we signed a contract.
They decided that one child isn't enough and that they should go out and get a brother.
I had to go on a train overnight to a place, to a location where a child was. That was Alex, just 2 weeks old, sturdy little guy, had an awful big nose then. And I called Harpo and I said, I don't know about this. Should I pay attention to physical things like the nose is enormous? He said, pay no attention, get him, bring him in.
And they went out and they got another brother.
The roundest, most wonderful, adorable child you ever saw in your whole life. I said, that's right, that's Jimmy.
And it was a family that was brought about because of love, not because they had to or obligation or anything.
Maybe a month or two later, I'm saying to Harpo, I'm going to keep this up until I get a girl, because you can't have a family without a girl. It's just impossible. And just then, got a telephone call from New York.
George Burns and Gracie Allen went to visit some people in New York, and they called my parents back in California and said that they had found a little girl whose parents had been killed.
Gracie says, she's wonderful. So I said, Harpo, what do you think? He says, don't be silly.
And I was the Minnie that they were looking for.
He always had great confidence in me, and he was really responsible for my going into the music profession and feeling confident about it.
We'd like to do for you now one of the tunes from our newest album for Mercury Records. This is called My Blue Heaven.
Thank you, Bill.
He always said, whatever you do, if you enjoy doing it, do it. Don't worry about it. The minute you stop enjoying doing it, do something else that you will enjoy.
Harpo was an unschooled intellectual.
I believe Harpo was born with sophistication. He was able to create outside of the entertainment field. He was able to paint.
He started to paint himself from a mirror without makeup. He painted himself first on the canvas, then he put the makeup on it, which made it a realistic clown.
And he would spend hours in the studio painting. It was very relaxing for him. It was just something he loved to do.
I get people who have come up to me and they say, your dad, he really could talk, couldn't he? Couldn't he? They don't really know.
I had one woman say to me, what was it like to be married to a deaf and dumb man? You know, people, they believe that. Never occurred to them that he didn't talk because he got so scared the first time he was shoved on stage that he turned with his back to the audience and let fly. It was just, he couldn't control himself. He was so terrified. From then on, he never spoke.
And Harpo was every bit as sweet and kind and nice as he appeared in the movies. He was just a gentle, loving soul.
My father didn't have enough time to spend with his children when he was working, when we were living in Beverly Hills. The only time he ever got to see or visit with his children was at night. Well, we're in bed. We go to bed at 8 o'clock in the evening, and he wouldn't get home till 10 o'clock. So the only thing he could do, he would have to come wake someone up in the middle of the night.
I woke up in the middle of the night, and we have this big king-size bed, and Harpo was not there. And I went into Minnie's room to see if anything was going on there, and there were Minnie and Harpo on the floor in the bathroom playing jacks.
My mother was the disciplinarian in the family. My mother was the teacher, you might say the role model. And my father was the person, I guess, that just wanted to love the children.